going on, guys? Welcome back to the Social Club, where you know everybody's got a voice. I'm your host, Serg, and on today's episode, we're going to be reflecting a bit on the 2025 NFL season, and actually, in fact, a few of the more recent seasons for that matter. We saw some pretty wild things this year, yeah? I'd say we saw powerhouse teams like even my Chiefs get knocked out and not even have a playoff year appearance, whereas you have other teams that were, bottom feeder of the league, and the Carolina Panthers and the Chicago Bears both having playoff appearances themselves. The Bears actually taking it a step further with the second round appearance. But I'm not even here to talk about, the playoffs, regular season records, the upcoming Super Bowl matchup, any of those things. I want to talk about a constant that we've seen in the league now for quite some time that just feels like it keeps getting overlooked. And that is the injury bug that just continues to bite on the guys down in the San Francisco 49ers organization. Now, before we even get into this, let's set one thing straight. I am not a 49ers fan. I think that's safe to say. I think everybody watching this channel knows that by now. I do have family that plays for the 49ers, though. Shout out my boy Dominic Pooney. Feed 77. That boy's a dog out there in our offensive line. But outside of all that, let's take out the superstition. Let's take out the bad luck vibe. Let's take out, everything that's in the air that has no real, numerical data behind it. And, let's bring in, the facts, the numbers, the data, everything that shows over the last 10 years as to why this organization just continues to be the most injured in football. So that's what we'll be unpacking today. It's going to be an interesting one because since moving to Levi Stadium in 2014, 13, one of the two. It's 2013 to 2014. I can't remember. But since moving there, the 49ers have continued to be one of the most injured teams in the NFL. And I don't think that comes as a coincidence. Now, this comes down to being about patterns, data. You even put in, the decade-long injury profile that nobody seems to be able to make sense of. But it's time to look past, a bunch of coincidences and just blaming bad luck and saying, these guys just have, the bad luck charm on them. This all points back at something here, and that's what we're going to unpack today, is how the 49ers organization seems to not be able to shake this injury bug they always have, and exactly what it is that I think may be causing it. But you guys know the deal. Before we get into today's topic, go ahead and smash that subscribe button down below. Make sure you follow us on all the social media platforms. That's Facebook. Now we're on Twitter. That's Instagram. And most of all, guys, I couldn't share enough thanks with you. And I know I'm getting ahead of the channel because I'm sure we're going to have something coming out soon. We have like an actual personal thank you. But guys, we have finally broke 1,000 subscribers on the Social Club's YouTube channel. And my God, it feels so good. I mean, we did this in under a year. I think that's the craziest part about all of it. And it comes from a lot of hard work from the guys here on the team, making sure we're putting out consistent content you guys actually want to be a part of. And it also goes to you guys in the community, because obviously you're the ones hitting subscribe. You're the ones clicking the follow. You're the ones engaging with us down there in the comments. And we couldn't have been here without you guys. So thank you so much for empowering the vision and being a part of something that's truly remarkable, because it's only up from here, man. We got monetized, baby. Look, the possibilities are endless at this point. But you know what that means, guys. It doesn't stop at this point. We just keep progressing. So as we always say, share this video with a friend, share your favorite video with a friend. Go ahead, drop in the comments down below, give us some engagement and so forth, because we have got a big year up ahead. But again, thank you so much for 1K. Now let's call it for what it is. Actually, first things first, let me say a lot of these points I'm going to make are not my own direct research. It's research that I came across in doing research. So, I can't remember everybody's name off the top of my head, but I will cite their work in the description. But when you take these pieces and you put them together, it's really hard to keep saying this is a coincidence. But since 2014, the 49ers have been consistently ranked among the NFL's worst teams in adjusted games lost. Now, what the hell does AGL mean, Serg? I'm going to tell you, because I didn't know what the hell that meant either. This measures the total impact of injuries on a team by weighting games missed based on player importance. So unlike your simple injury report, this is going to take in factors of your key contributors, your starters on the team, times that they're unavailable, and those games that you were losing or that you were underperforming, what might the mean or the median be for that team, that's what this comes down to be. Not something you come across in your daily fantasy summary report, anything like that, but it's definitely something beneficial to this context. Reason being is because the 49ers, as mentioned, rank among the worst NFL teams to be in this bracket, meaning that they typically do suffer from this quite often. In fact, in seasons, I think they said 2020 and in 2024, two really bad seasons for the 49ers, they ranked dead last in the league, far exceeding the rest of the league average by, I think, roughly it's like 75 AGL. I don't know what the actual increments mean by any means, but you look at the next guy, it's a marginal gap. It's a pretty big fucking gap, I'm not gonna lie to you. But here's the thing, here's what's actually pretty interesting about it, because you look at the 49ers and you even look at, this year, on paper it was pretty impressive they even made it to the playoffs because they were just so damn banged up. But on the contrary, when they are at their best, when they're at their most healthy, they're one of the most competitive teams in the league. You look at, 2023, they ranked amongst the best in AGL in the league. I think top 10 or top 8 or something like that. And I'm pretty sure they went 12-5 that year, and they even reached the Super Bowl that year. So, they reached the Super Bowl. We know what happened then. But besides the point, same organization, same philosophy. The value that changed was their health. Compare that to years like 2020, when they had 18 players on injured reserve, and you're losing players like, Nick Bosa and Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, it really does start to bring the team around down, and it starts to nosedive quite a bit. Now, this season, I mentioned a moment ago, is just another great example. It's the latest example in the bunch. You got the 49ers sitting at they had a 13-3 loss, I think it was, to Seattle, which was ugly, very ugly. But that dropped them down to be in the 6th seed, so still making it to the playoff picture, still got a chance to make it to the dance after the fact. But out of that game, they lost D. Winters, I'm pretty sure to an ankle injury, Tatum Bethune, something like that, I don't know his name, but I think that was a groin or a pelvic injury that he lost it to. And then Brock Purdy, also, he straightened the hell out of his shoulder, and I think that was on the last play of the game. So you got 3 pretty significant, dings that come out of a, pretty ugly ass loss to the Seahawks. I mean, all in all, and hindsight's 2020, but you look at those are big game contributors that are now injured or questionable for the next game, and you're heading into the playoffs when you need your starters to be tip-top shape. You need them the most. Let's not forget they already have some season-ending injuries in Nick Bosa, in Brandon Ayuk, Fred Warner, and those are common household names. Those are stars on the offense and the defense. And to not have them and still make it to the playoffs, again, still very impressive. But then you put in the most recent one, and this would actually hurt to watch. I watched this in 4K myself, is George Kittle going down to the Achilles tendon injury. And, at that point, if you're a 49ers fan, you got to look in the mirror. You got to ask yourself, what do we do? What do we do to deserve this? Why are we going through this at this point? And it comes back to one thing that the 49ers face that no other team in the NFL has to deal with. And if you look at the full picture, it's not even that the 49ers necessarily get hurt more. Don't get me wrong, they do, but it's how they get hurt. It's the injuries that they are sustaining is where things get really interesting. In health literacy, they call these collagen-rich structures, tendons, ligament junctions, tissues that just fail at certain joints where they shouldn't. And they fail due to an overexertion of stress that essentially caused them to snap or cause them to implode or whatever it is you may want to call it. Now, here's the thing. Other teams running the same schemes. They're running the same inside zone plays. Other teams are playing on the same hybrid turf they're playing on down in Levi Stadium. Other teams push their players just as hard, if not harder. In some organizations, they're pushing their players even harder than the 49ers are being pushed. So this has to tell you something about how this is all happening. And this is what I'm getting at. You're probably like, Serge, what the hell is your point in all this? Yes, we get it. They're having all these injuries. They're of all the same similar magnitude. What does it mean? What does it mean? What I find to be very interesting is that the 49ers practice facility sits less than 100 yards, less than a football field, from a 60 kilovolt substation. Now, what does that mean? I'm not a electrician. I'm not a goddamn electrician. I have no idea, but from what they measure on readings and whatnot, they here, I'll pull this here. So they measured magnetic field levels near the practice fields to reach 8.5 milligauss, whatever that is. Inside training, recovery, and film rooms, estimates range from 13 to 21 milligauss, potentially higher during peak electrical demand. I'm not an electrician. I don't know what milligauss means or anything like that, but I did find a comparison to put it into layman's terms for you. And for comparison, most homes, like the one I'm sitting in, and offices sit between 0.5 and 3 milligauss. So we're talking about not even triple, not even quadruple, but 5 times the output, 5 times the exposure in your training facility, your day-to-day, recovery facility. I think there's a bit of a trend. I think there's a bit of correlation. Now, what's all this mean, Serg? I could read you off this entire article front to back, but if I were to paraphrase it, essentially they're saying that there's a hypothesis floating around that this exposure they have, to this radiation they're experiencing it's not an instant injury or instant, catastrophe that they're calling it, but it is a gradual degradation of performance. Ultimately, the argument is that extremely low frequency magnetic fields disrupting cellular and mitochondrial processes do weaken collagen over time. Now, they're saying that this damage could stay hidden for one routine cut, one foot plant. One cut could end a season, as we saw with George Kittle just recently a few weeks ago. It comes down to a point where you recognize these plays that the 49ers make and these plays that other teams or other players in other organizations are making. For them, it might be a play they sit out, or they might not even sit out a play. They get up and they brush that shit off. Whereas for the 49ers, that could be the season, just like that. And when you rope that into, a decade-long history of the most, and this is factual, you actually can look this up. I did do research on this. It's been about a decade of having the most collagen-heavy injuries in the NFL. It starts to look less like noise and more like a blueprint or a footprint, actually, of what's really transpiring down at Santa Clara. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, and this is why I think that, there are some people that might be onto something here. In doing more research and whatnot, you'll see that this doesn't get talked about a lot. Even a little bit of the spike I did see of it was very small, and it spiked for maybe a day. I think I saw some coverage on it. You look at officials, elected officials and doctors in the area, they push back hard. They say it doesn't exist. They say it's a very hard claim to make, and that, it's one of those things that isn't so credible. In fact, I'll read you what I've got here from the articles I've been doing research on. Bay Area physician Dr. Alok Patel told ABC News the claims are baseless, explaining that lab studies showing cellular damage from EMF exposure occur in controlled environments and don't translate cleanly to real-world activity. He also notes that some EMF frequencies are used therapeutically to aid recovery and suggests lack of rest as a more likely culprit. So ultimately, he's saying, yeah, you could create that scenario in a lab-like environment, in a lab setting, something like that could happen, but that's not enough, research or enough data to say it could happen in the real world. I'm sorry. Since when do we run tests and test theories and hypotheses in lab-like experiments to not get an idea of how they translate to the real world? I thought that wording, I don't know if that's what he meant by it, but ultimately he said, because we can have it happen in a lab-controlled environment doesn't mean it'll happen in the real world. I always thought we tested in a lab-controlled environment to see if it could or would happen in the real world. But hey, that's just me. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm ignorant. But I'm just saying that felt like it was a really weird take to, angle with the media. The other thing, as far as the guideline, he's technically correct, is that if you look through, safety guidelines of human exposure to radiation and whatnot, federal and international standards only recognize harm if non-ionizing radiation causes measurable heating. If there's no heat, then there's no risk. Problem is, non-thermal effects are not even considered. They're not even flagged down. They're not even written down to be monitored. And it's like they just don't exist. It's like, okay, well, if it's a non-thermal effect, then like who cares? Pretty much. With that, because of that specific guideline and them not willing to change that guideline, things like the substation get overlooked, and that's why it'll never get moved. That's why their practice facility will stay right where it's at, and this will continue to be overlooked for probably another 10 years. But when you look at the grand scheme of it all, the real reason why they won't do this is because the things they're talking about, those players having an excess amount of, exposure to, are the same things we battle with 5G, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth frequencies on a day in, day out basis. And I'm not even one to sit here and tell you that, we are, we're frying our brains, or 5G is the worst thing to happen to us, and we're slowly melting the core of our. I'm not one of those guys. Okay, I personally could give a damn about where your 5G, your Wi-Fi, your Bluetooth comes from. I just want to make sure it's on. But I also don't want to overlook the fact that these same exposures are literally kind of becoming the reason behind an organization's, fall off. Because you look at the 49ers team, they're on paper typically a superstar program, and they typically do reap a lot of success under whatever conditions they're presented with. But when you have a literally a decade-long stretch of deep collagen injuries, similar injuries amongst similar players in similar skill positions, I think there comes a point where we have to stop saying it's a coincidence. We've got to look for a common denominator here, and that common denominator just happens to be that goddamn, 60 kilowatt volt, whatever the hell, substation that's in the backyard of their training facility. Now, the thing is, tests already show that, an overload of exposure to certain frequencies can weaken tendons, ligaments, all that stuff. That alone should warrant a deeper investigation into this, but it's because of the type of exposure and frequency that it is. Like I said, if there's no heat, there's no risk. They don't give a damn. And in this case, there is no heat. It's really just frequency. It's just exposure. But it's an excess amount of exposure that's being overlooked on these players, and I'm afraid that that's being overlooked on their health. I'm not one to sit here and say give the 49ers a reason to, win the Super Bowl or give them another pat on the back or one more handicap to make it happen. But I am at the same time going to say, let's be fair. If it comes down to it, give these guys a better practice facility, a newer practice facility, somewhere away from, an electrical substation. Just a thought. But that's, again, my take. I'd like to hear from you guys, because this has been circling on the internet for weeks now. It actually was a debate earlier in the season that kind of sparked up again when George Kittle got hurt. But tell me, do you guys think there's a correlation between this substation and the injuries the 49ers continue to face? Because you can go back. Look back to 2014. I won't sit here and list them all off because there's honestly too many to name, but look at all the injuries the 49ers have experienced since 2014. Look at how many of them are deep, low collagen injuries. Look at how many of them are season-ending injuries. And look at how many of them come in clusters. I'm talking not one or two people out for the season. I'm talking 5 or 6 star players. Go look at that AGL. I'm telling y'all, it's real, man. So I do want to have a discussion about this, guys. Hop down in the comments. Tell me your thoughts. Do you think this substation is causing an issue in these players' health or their willingness to be able to bear injuries, whatever that looks like? Jump down in the comments. Let me know what it is you think, because I'm thinking we might have to give 49ers a new practice facility here soon. But with that said, guys, thanks for tapping into another episode of the Social Club. We've got 2 weeks until the football season comes to a close, with the Pats taking on the Seahawks in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl title. If any of you remember, I did a video earlier this year, or last year, I should say. Happy New Year. Kind of going over the AFC versus the NFC and their overall record. And You know, as much as I thought the Pats really kind of dominated the AFC this year, I think this is going to be another year that the Seahawks give the NFC another edge. But we shall see. So go ahead and throw that in the comments too. Who do you think is going to win the big bowl? And do you think we need to get 49ers out of this goddamn practice facility? But until next time, guys, it's been well.